I heard a heavy step approaching behind the great door, and saw through the chinks the gleam of a coming light. Then there was the sound of rattling chains, and the clinking of massive bolts drawn back. A key was turned, with the loud grating noise of long disuse, and the great doors swung back. Within stood a tall old man, clean-shaven save for a long white mustache, and clad in black from head to foot, without a single speck of color about him anywhere. He held in his hand an antique silver lamp, in which the flame burned without chimney or globe of any kind, throwing long quivering shadows as it flickered in the draught of the open door. The old man motioned me in with his right hand, with a courtly gesture, saying in excellent English, but with a strange intonation, "Welcome to my house. Enter freely, and of your own will." He made no motion of stepping to meet me, but stood like a statue, as though his gesture of welcome had fixed him into stone. The instant, however, that I had stepped over the threshold, he moved impulsively forward, and holding out his hand, grasped mine with a strength which made me wince, an effect which was not lessened by the fact that it seemed as cold as ice, more like the hand of a dead than a living man. Again he said, "Welcome to my house. Come freely, go safely, and leave something of the happiness you bring." That, my friends, was the beginning of this thrilling novel. Yes, it's Dracula. It's finally Dracula. Dracula by Bram Stoker. This fantastic novel, this was published on the 26th of May in 1897. It has, as far as I know, never been out of print. This is a very, very popular novel. Of course, everybody knows who Dracula is. Dracula, who has spawned a gazillion movies. Some good, some bad, some just okay. Somehow, none of them seem to have captured exactly the spirit or definitely the plot of the book. We've all been waiting for a century for an accurate telling of Dracula. Never seems to happen. Not that I'm aware of, anyway. But there have been some really, really good Dracula movies despite that. But this book, man, this book is something else, Dracula. I first read this book when I was just a little kid. I've mentioned that before, that Dracula is, in fact, the first book written for adults that I had ever read. I had read children's books, some comic books, and Dracula. And Dracula, of course, when I first read this as a little child, I didn't know half of what was going on in this book. It was all above my head, but I loved it. Because even though I couldn't grasp everything, a lot of words I didn't understand, a lot of situations that I just flew right by me, I liked it. It was scary. It was scary as a little kid. And I've been reading it every year or every couple years since. And I always get something out of this book. Dracula is a magnificent book of sheer horror about Dracula, the Transylvanian dead nobleman, undead nobleman, the vampire from Transylvania, who wants to move to England and probably create an army of undead followers in this vast metropolis. See, in England, well, he's got plenty of human beings to work with, and he's attracted to England and its modernity and perhaps even its technology, but mostly he's attracted to England because of the opportunities that it presents to an evil undead vampire. The king of vampires, Dracula. So it begins, of course, with solicitor Jonathan Harker going to visit Dracula because Dracula has bought some property that he wants to move into, which will be one of his bases of operations. And of course, this novel famously is told in the form of journal entries, letters, newspaper articles, all this different material which has been cobbled together to tell you this accurate and true story of Dracula, all to give it a sense of reality. Doesn't always accomplish that, but overall, this is a fantastic novel. The plotting is really good in this novel. Dracula is really fearsome in this book. He's a lot creepier than he is in most of the films that he stars in. There are a lot of great Dracula movies, like I said, and we've had some wonderful performances of Dracula, notably Bela Lugosi, who we all think of for his performance of Dracula, not just because of his super thick accent, but he was actually really good as Dracula. He was really good as this just creepy undead monster. And his performance actually is the reason to watch the original Dracula. It had some other high points, but it had a lot of low points, that film. But his performance of Dracula was really good. And of course, Christopher Lee was excellent as Dracula. But the Dracula in this book just seems really creepy and dangerous. He seems like a really vicious, dangerous creature. And you get the sense of what a menace he is. Not just to the women in our main characters' lives, but to all civilization. He is a danger to civilization itself, specifically Victorian civilization. The opening sequences famously are very powerful, where Jonathan Harker, who goes to see Dracula in his native country to bring some contracts for the property that Dracula has bought in England, and then becomes Dracula's prisoner, and the prisoner of Dracula's 3 vampire wives. Those scenes are incredible between Jonathan Harker, poor hapless Jonathan Harker, and the terrifying vampire wives. But then Jonathan Harker has to find a way to escape from Dracula's castle. And it's kind of harrowing. It's just a brilliant opening sequence. The book does slow down a bit after that because the story returns to England before Dracula actually arrives on ship. And we meet Mina Harker, or the future Mina Harker, Mina Murray, who becomes Mina Harker later on. We meet her friend Lucy, all the other characters, Dr. Seward, Quincy Morris, all the characters that become the fearless vampire hunters later on, or victims of Dracula. And the plot does slow down a little bit, but it's still really interesting. And when Dracula arrives, it becomes more interesting. Dracula becomes a shadowy figure throughout a big chunk, a big middle section of this book. But when he shows back up, it's worth the wait. He is properly terrifying. As he goes to England, starts drinking blood all over the place, and as he drinks blood, he becomes younger. So he's a much younger man when younger undead creature, when Jonathan Harker sees him again later. And of course, Dracula immediately starts preying on Lucy and Mina, probably just to get at Jonathan Harker, I suppose. He makes them his direct targets. He's really evil, this Dracula. Just an evil, vicious character. And of course, he then confronts famous scientist Van Helsing. Van Helsing is an interesting character because Van Helsing is sort of on the borderland of modern science and ancient superstition. And this book sort of totters on the borderland there too, where it's looking back to these ancient superstitions, such as the vampire, and looking forward to a modern technological society. There is a lot of technology in this book, and the characters use not just old folk remedies like garlic, but some modern devices and modern technology in their fight against Dracula. It's kind of interesting, where you'll see a bunch of modern stuff throughout this novel. Part of the pride of England is its technology and its new urban society. And Dracula, of course, is a threat to all of that, as he is a threat to Victorian propriety in itself. Famously, there's a lot of sex in this book, barely disguised. Bram Stoker seemed to be a bit afraid of sex and yet attracted to it as well, of course. A very Victorian thing. Sex is desirable yet terrifying because it implies a loss of control, I suppose. You have Mina, who's an incredibly capable character in this book. Mina is actually one of the most capable characters in this book, and yet the book sort of rails against the idea of the new woman, at the time, the more independent woman, a woman who doesn't necessarily need a man. Again, a terrifying idea. So Mina jokes about the new woman and sort of says she isn't one, and yet at the same time she's a very capable character. And so changes in society, there are things about that seem to trouble Bram Stoker, and he puts it in his book. And Dracula sort of represents all the dangers which Victorian society was up against, or at least feared that it was up against. You know, the Victorians, they wanted to be very proper, and Dracula was a very improper character. So our heroes in this novel basically see the threat that Dracula represents and band together to fight against Dracula and to defeat Dracula. The way the story is told is pretty gripping for the most part. There are a couple dead spots in this book, but it's an excellent read altogether because there's just so much you can get out of this. So much that Stoker is saying, and that Stoker is saying that he doesn't mean to say. Stoker's one of those writers that says more than he thinks he is. He gives a lot of himself away in this book. Some writers are like that, and he does it. And that's one of the things that's sort of fascinating. I mean, you can go straight to the scene where Jonathan Harker is lying down and the vampire women are creeping up upon him, about to suck his blood, and how he's terrified of it, but sort of wants it to happen at the same time. There's a lot of that kind of thing in this book. And again, it's the danger of loss of control, which the Victorians were so terrified of. And Bram Stoker seems to be particularly terrified of that idea. Bram Stoker didn't always write terrific books. A lot of what he wrote in his different books are at least interesting, very often entertaining, but this is great. The ending is really, really good as well. There's some really great stuff in here. There's some not so great stuff in here. We get a little too much of Van Helsing, I think. Van Helsing's accent is over the top. Van Helsing is occasionally just an over-the-top, hard to take, and maybe a little bit crazy character. We probably don't get enough of Renfield, crazy bug-eating Renfield. He was a lot of fun. He was a well-done character. I kind of feel like we could have used a bit more Dracula in Dracula. He is used sparingly. He's always in the background as the danger. But I feel like we could have used more Dracula on scene. If there's one thing I would change, it's that for sure. A little less Van Helsing, a little bit more Dracula. But as it is, it's a tremendous book. I love it. It's my favorite horror novel of all time. It succeeds remarkably well as a horror novel. It succeeds on a number of levels. It's definitely worthy of its classic status, and not just because a ton of movies have been made off of this book, and that the character of Dracula has become something on its own. Everybody knows Dracula. Not a heck of a lot of people have read Dracula. Just the way it goes. But the book itself, an incredible book. Even if you're not into horror and that kind of thing, Dracula is worth reading just for its place in literature. Its deserved place in literature. Because not only is it a tremendously fun story, it's a really, really interesting book. It's very much a product of its time. It's hard to think of a book that was more a product of its time than this one, because all the anxieties of that time are just crystallized in this book. Fantastic. Dracula. That is your Sunday Penguin for the day. I hope you enjoyed it. I will catch you back here at the stately Vaughan Manor, hopefully tomorrow when I do my Mythos Monday. I have some thrilling things planned for this week, so I will catch you next time. You guys have a great day.